Hello, everyone. I'm Daryl Fears. I'm a national environmental reporter for the Washington Post. And for our final segment today, we're going to be talking about environmental quality and efforts to promote environmental standards and justice in the United States and across the world. And with me to talk about this are Catherine Coleman Flowers, founder of the Alabama Center for Rural Enterprise Community Development Corporation, which seeks to address the root causes of poverty by seeking sustainable solutions. Dune Ives, Executive Director of the Lonely Whale, an organization that works across public and private sectors to promote market-based and policy change to help reduce ocean waste. And finally, Brendan Shane, Regional Director for North America, C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group, where he supports C40 cities in the United States and Canada in their climate action and sustainability initiatives and facilitates inter-city, regional, and global collaboration. Just a reminder to tweet your questions for our panelists at hashtag World in Balance, and we'll take a few of those during the conversation. Panelists, that's all. Oops, I'm sorry. Let's go. Whoops. Okay, so let's get that conversation started. I'd like to ask if there's anything opening a statement that any of you would like to say about this issue in your part of the world.
Well, I could start being from Alabama. Thank you for this opportunity to be able to present and talk about environmental justice. I work in a community that's located between Selma and Montgomery. And there, as we talk about dealing with environmental issues, people there still don't have the basic right to sanitation. When they flush their toilets, it's either going out on the ground or it's coming back into their homes. And we need to address that in this country. We partnered with Baylor's National School of Tropical Medicine and did a study that revealed that we found evidence of hookworm and other tropical parasites here in the United States of America. And I believe that that's an atrocity at this particular day and time, and especially when there's discussion around ending the efforts of the EPA and other kinds of efforts around climate. And here we have the perfect marriage of environmental justice and climate change, where we're starting to see tropical illnesses that normally are not seen in the United States, but because the climate is in fact changing, people are being exposed to that, and they're going to move further north. But these are infrastructure issues that we need to address in rural communities that have never been addressed.
And Catherine, how unusual is it to see a widespread case of hookworm in these communities in this day and time?
It's very unusual. Actually, if you look at the literature, you know, the Rockefeller Sanitary Commission takes credit for eliminating this in the first part of the last century. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about 2017, and we see evidence of it. So much so that it has garnered international attention that here in the United States of America, where we have one of the richest and most robust economies in the world, there are a lot of people that have been left out. So as we talk about how we build sustainability, we need to first of all look at those communities that we've left out and have never addressed these issues in the first place. Because I want to bring solar power to my community, but I also want to make sure that they're not on homes that are energy inefficient, mobile homes that people living in that don't even gain value.
Speaking of the waste, Dune, how much of our garbage winds up in the ocean? How much plastic is out there, and what can we do to sort of start mitigating that?
Well, at the risk of being the bad news panel here today, and thank you for having me on the panel this morning. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you. Every year we produce 300 million metric tons of new plastic. Only 10% of that is recycled. About 78% of that becomes waste. A lot of that actually ends up into the ocean, either through rivers and lakes as part of oceanic, or directly into the ocean itself. So we know that annually between 8 and 12 million metric tons of plastic is making its way into the ocean. Once it's in the ocean, it's nearly impossible to extract it. Mm-hmm. A lot of plastic is breaking down into what's called microplastics. Straws, cups, lids, plastic bags. There's a lot of low-value plastics, they're called, that don't have an end-of-life market presently available to them to be able to be purchased. But they break up into microplastics, and they become really attractive to fish. They are ingested by, the estimate right now is 100% of all 7 species of turtles ingest plastic. Many of them become entangled by plastic as well. So it's pervasive.
Right. I recently wrote a story about plastics, and of the 9 billion tons of plastics produced in the world since the invention of plastics around 1950, 7 billion tons still exist. And so we've only gotten rid of 2 billion tons of plastic. The stuff stays around forever. There is a campaign to do little things like eliminate straws and stuff like that because a straw got stuck in a turtle's nose. Can you tell us a little more about the danger that these plastics pose to these animals and what's happening out there with them?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So the estimate right now is when an animal ingests plastic, it has a 50% mortality rate. Straws, bags, I think everybody's seen the video of the turtle with the straw in its nose. It's heartbreaking. We recently received a photo of a fish from Indonesia that had a straw in its belly and a chip bag and a biodegradable plastic spoon. Plastic bags are showing up in the bellies of whales. These animals can't recover, and it's our waste that's causing it. I think also important, and I love what Governor Schwarzenegger recently said from COP23 when he said we have to start talking about these environmental issues in a different way. We have to think about it in terms of our human health. And that's where we get back to the environmental justice conversation is plastic pollution impacts us as a species. 94% of our drinking water in the United States is polluted with plastic. That should scare us that we're drinking plastic. We know plastic fibers are showing up in the flesh of fish. When the vast majority of the world's population relies on marine-based protein as their primary source of protein, that's injustice. So it is harmful to animals. I think we're only now beginning to see what the potential impact is to us as species. And as a mother of a 3-year-old, I no longer serve my child fish sticks.
Brendan, you do important work that few people understand, few people know about. So why don't you start by explaining to us what a C40 city is and exactly what it is that you do?
Yeah. Well, we are a network, actually not of 40 anymore, but of 91 of the largest cities in the world. So that's about 650 million people, and a large chunk, about a quarter of the world's GDP. So these are the mayors in all parts of the world that are most dedicated to pushing for climate change action. But I think to follow on the comments you just heard, what these mayors really want to do is improve the health, the sanitation, the air quality, the delivery of services for their constituents, whether it's in Africa, Asia, or here in the United States. And so we are a climate-focused organization, but much of the emphasis we have right now is looking at what's the nexus between the equity outcomes, the improving inclusion and equity in communities that also that you see with the same type of actions we need to take for climate protection, whether it's solar, whether it's better water resource management, and in particular whether it's waste management. Our cities, not to cast aspersions, but the waste you're referring to is coming in large part from our cities, and much of that from Southeast China, from the Philippines, from cities, and they're taking these issues very seriously. And so our role is bringing the mayors together, bringing the technical staff, NGOs, and partners together to try to tackle those with the best available solutions.
And so what do we have in the way of results so far?
Well, they vary. I mean, these challenges are extremely difficult, and so we see good progress in a number of communities. In, let's say, more developed cities, you see really rapid movement. We're going to see cities that are indeed carbon neutral, that are down to the point of no net emissions in the next decade. And then in parts of the developing world, you see really strong advances around, let's say, mobility in particular. Mobility, just the ability to get around, and cleaner transport that improves air quality and lets people live a healthier, better life. So, but all those regions are challenged by any number of issues. Air quality problems, even if your city in Europe is pushing hard toward a low carbon economy and no emissions, you're still getting polluted air. You're still eating fish out of polluted waters. So the challenges keep rising, and that's sort of what we try to do. We call ourselves the Climate Leadership Group because we're trying to keep pushing hard on ourselves, on our own leaders, to kind of keep upping the ante. You just saw it at COP23 this past week in Bonn, all the nations coming together and realizing, you know, what we've committed to so far is good, but it's not enough. And it's not enough for the climate, but it's also not enough for the oceans or for, you know, sanitation and the health of communities.
Catherine, you're representing people who are who have very little sort of resources, who are poor, who have very little representation and political power. And across the United States and of course the world, you have these people living in the most vulnerable areas, near shipping ports, near waste treatment facilities, near Superfund sites, toxic Superfund sites, because they don't have any power. And so does the government have a responsibility to sort of rescue these people from this, to create policies? And how do you get them to create these policies that sort of alleviate some of these problems in their communities?
Well, first of all, I think that the government is a factor in some of these dirty industries that have located in these communities, because a lot of times the government is providing incentives for them to locate there. And oftentimes they're left to their own devices, and if they're poisoning the community, like in Uniontown, they're bringing in coal ash. I mean, the people there are suffering as a result.
So how do those people fight this? What can you do to mobilize opposition?
Well, a lot of people are organizing and trying to fight it. I think that one of the problems that we have in rural communities is that the major media is not interested in covering stories there. Fortunately, there's a lot of attention in Alabama right now. Hopefully, we can look at some of those other problems we have too. So I think that's one thing, because there are groups that are organized throughout Alabama, I know for sure, and throughout the Gulf Coast region. A lot of people that when I go to Detroit, for an example, people are organizing there because they have water affordability issues where people's homes are being taken because they can't afford the water bill. They put water mortgages on their homes. So these problems are happening around the country, and people are organizing. The problem is we don't get the media attention. And lastly, I think in terms of how we address the policies, we've been working with Senator Cory Booker on developing some EJ policies. This morning I had a meeting with a group here that's also working on that as well.
Okay, I think we just got called out twice in one. So Dune, you were aware of some of the problems out there in the drinking water and with plastics, but to a large degree, the very problems you talked about, people aren't generally aware of them, and it seems that it's easy to make them aware of it, but maybe I'm wrong about that. Are people aware? If they're not aware, how do you make them more aware that their children and themselves may be drinking these pollutants?
I'm fortunate to live in Seattle, Washington, and every day I get to look out my window at the Puget Sound, and I see the water, and it looks beautiful. It's blue, and blue means good, right? It doesn't mean that it's polluted. I think ocean health issues are really difficult to solve for because the ocean looks healthy. One, if we even recognize that there's an ocean, and we think about it, which the vast majority of us don't think about it on a daily basis. It covers the majority of our planet, but it's pretty far away from us, and it's pretty unattainable. To be able to get on the water, in the water, requires means, right? And most of us don't have those means to be able to do it. So you're right, people typically aren't aware that there's an ocean that has issues. So we're doing two things at Lonely Well. One is we're incubating these courageous campaigns. So our campaign we have right now is called Stop Sucking. And it's about single-use plastic straws. Every day in the United States, we use 500 million non-recyclable plastic straws. They're not all getting into the water, but a lot of them are. But it's really a token. It's that token item to say we have a relationship, we have a toxic relationship with single-use plastics, and we need to break that relationship. It's effective in garnering attention and spreading the message. It's in over 40 countries already, which is exciting. But we also know that we need market-based solutions and we need policy change to really support this awareness building and the change that we need. So we're working really closely with Dell, based in Austin, Texas. Dell, in partnership with Lonely Well, is launching a consortium of global enterprises, global companies, that together are trying to stand up the first commercially viable and operational ocean-bound material supply chain. And in doing so, what they've committed to is integrating this waste product, plastic bottles, bags, nylon material, into their products and packaging, so turning the faucet off, while other companies are looking at recyclability and infrastructure development. Dell's leadership in this space cannot be understated. I love what you said about, it really is the government allowing these companies to come in and they do what they're going to do. Companies have the opportunity to take a very thoughtful leadership role on these environmental issues that we're dealing with. They have such leverage and such power to be able to influence within their own industry, but cross-industry as well. So while those of us are fighting the good fight on the ground and raising awareness and building a global movement, we need the help of corporations like Dell to really push this forward. And I think what that does is it shows policymakers that the market is supportive of change. It becomes so much easier for policy to get put into place.
To bring this issue back to the audience, in this area, we're fortunate enough to have the Chesapeake Bay cleanup plan, which is ongoing and going for the next 10 years. But the Potomac River, where most of you get your water, has a little problem with male bass somehow becoming female bass because of, scientists think, pollutants in the water from chemicals from the stuff that many of you pour down the toilet and the sink. That's affecting marine life there. So the water sometimes isn't as pure here as you might think. Yeah. So, Brendan,
can I just pick up on the last comment? Yeah, I was just
last
say because,
time too.
Yeah, I think that in the waste context, but also in the climate context, and just to refer to the effort that was just very strong effort at the UN negotiations from the United States. This "We Are Still In" campaign, which was talking about the dedication of states and cities to the Paris Accords, to pushing for climate change. What that really, I think, recognizes is just what Dune was referencing, that we were there working with cities, but it really is that combination of government, states and cities, counties, and tribes. But then it's the private sector. So what you saw stepping up were thousands of companies, also universities, healthcare systems, coming together, because you have those are the groups across, collectively in particular, that can aggregate the demand to change the market the way you're describing. And that might be changing it to say we have to have the 100% renewable supply that Lisa Jackson was referring to, or that we need to see materials that are either biodegradable or fully recyclable, or maybe just we're not going to use those types of plastic products at all anymore. No more single use for certain categories.
I think that's right. I think that's right. And I think we also, there's some really local issues that are very present, especially for the work you're doing in Alabama with C91, you're going to rebrand, C40. And there is a really important role for the UN to play in these conversations. The Sustainable Development Goals give us a marker that we can work towards. So we work very closely with the UN Environment Program and their Clean Seas Initiative, which is tied to Sustainable Development Goal 14. And that has shown already a galvanizing force of, I think it's over 30 countries making a commitment to achieve a clean sea and now beat pollution. There's all types of pollution. And so having these momentum building movements at that international scale can really help to shine a light where it should be shined on great progress being moved forward, and then also providing a pathway forward to what do we have to hit by 2025 in our case to make sure that we don't have more plastic by volume than fish in the ocean by 2025. We're going to see a lot more transformation of fish than you're currently seeing here with the males turning female.
Right.
And I also wanted to mention, even with our work, we're also working with the United Nations. We've sent in a request to the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, who's going to be coming to Alabama on the 7th and 8th of December.
Okay, have another question, but I want to take a question from Twitter. And Akagan asks, the last panel suggested business will take care of sustainability concerns, especially as consumers demand it. Does this panel agree?
Yes and no. Can we say yes and no, both? I think it's important for consumers to make their voices known, to let corporations know what their interests are, what matters to them in communities, and what they expect from brand value propositions. So if you have a favorite brand that you love, but you know that it's polluting the ocean, or it's polluting our communities, or it's not doing enough around climate, we should make the voice known. And it's really up to those thoughtful leaders within the corporations to determine whether or not they have the strength of leadership to respond.
So does it depend more on the consumer to push this, or does it depend more on the companies to recognize it?
I think it depends.
I think it's yes and no as well. I think that
yes and no is kind of
well. Let me just give an example. There are some companies that are perpetuators of the pollution, but then there are also those companies that realize they have a social responsibility. There's a company, for an example, I can't identify who they are right now, that's working with us on finding technological solutions to the on-site wastewater problem. I think that for them to even take that social responsibility step toward finding a solution is the key to how we get past where we are right now.
And in that instance, who approached who? Did they approach you, or did you?
They approached us.
Okay. Out of the blue?
Yes.
Okay.
I think what you're going to, I'm so sorry. Go ahead. I think what you're going to see more and more of is thoughtful companies that are focused on their bottom line, taking these environmental and social issues more seriously. We have to have a more circular economy perspective in the work that we do environmentally as corporations. And those that are able to take that forward-looking, long-term perspective on the health of the planet are the ones that are going to be profitable. They're the ones that are going to continue to survive. So the question we should be asking is, which corporations are going to be here for the long haul?
Yeah, and where's the real leadership coming from? I think it has to be the corporations and the government working together, and frankly, it has to be very strong leadership from each sector, which is hard, and there's only so many people willing to do that. And those are the mayors, or maybe the governor, the local leader, the local business, or a corporate, global, that is going to stand up and say, we think we can do this better with less impact or a more positive impact on our customer, let's say, but on the globe as well. Governments and businesses aren't going to just solve it, by themselves. You really have to be looking at where the leadership's coming from and how quickly that can be shared out. And then ideally the customers, are going to demand that those better solutions, pervade the market, take over the market.
Okay, we have a question from Alan on Twitter who asks, for disadvantaged communities, is there too much focus or over-promising of advanced technologies when incremental improvements could be made to more conventional technologies to make them more sustainable?
Well, I guess I'll answer that question. I believe that, I don't think that we've overpromised what's available to other people around the country and even within the state itself. I think the problem has been the structures have been in place where the funding that would go in to support those type of technological, we're not even talking about advances, the extension, we're talking about communities where people are paying wastewater treatment fees and it's still coming back into their homes. So at what point do they get from the outhouse to where they can flush their toilets and not have to worry about seeing the feces in their own homes? I think that we have the technology here to do it. The question is the access. And I think what we have to look at across the board as we talk about clean energy, as we talk about even these basic things, we got to make sure that we need to have a diversity program and an inclusion program in that movement too, because it's not there. And therefore, we wouldn't continue to have these environmental justice issues that keep manifesting over and over again. And this is a basic issue that I think that we should have solved a long time ago. And the technology is there. The question is the will there, and is there the means to make sure that the money is spent equitably? I'll give you an example. Recently, there was a grant that was just given to a town to connect the businesses who are having on-site wastewater problems. However, within 5 minutes of the town hall, where people have raw sewage on the ground, they're left to their own devices and they're being criminalized because they can't afford the solution.
And I think there is a risk that sort of like the new shiny technology overshadows the basic changes that an earlier discussion about the need for efficiency maybe before renewables, or that the cheapest energy reductions you can get is or the energy you don't use. So I think that there can be an imbalance in paying more for a new shiny technology when a basic solution of delivering community-based services that bring efficiency, that bring better water quality, whether it's at Flint, whether you're giving someone a filter for their water as an important first step before you spend $200 million retrofitting a water system. So I think there is some risk that even though you want the new technologies to be advancing and to be getting ever more efficient and ever cheaper so that they can really expand in the market, there is a risk sometimes that you overlook the basic needs and cheaper solutions.
Okay, we've got 4 minutes left, and I wanted to take 2 audience questions. The first is for Brendan. How do cities hold each other accountable as the actions of one has an environmental impact on the other? Quickly.
Quick. Well, that's a tough question. I mean, when they literally are in close proximity, they can hold each other accountable, directly. I think one of the problems with our issues is they're big and they're esoteric, and it's about climate and it's about environment. So the steps we take for them to hold each other accountable is through reporting and transparency, making a public commitment, ideally seeing that commitment to, let's say, be carbon neutral or 100% renewable. Get that into the laws of your local community so that you're accountable for it, and then be reporting. We're working on, protocols that allow people in all parts of the world to report apples to apples, essentially.
Well, aren't states turning to the courts to solve some of these problems?
Yeah, well, a lot of people are turning into courts to solve the problems, and so there are options as well, where one community is really being wronged by another to take those issues to court. Yeah.
The next question is for Dune and Catherine. How do you connect local efforts in Alabama with those more globally focused to clean oceans? I think it's a little unfair to Dune, Alabama, but go ahead.
Well, Alabama does have an issue. We share the Gulf Coast. So, we've had issues with oil spills, and a lot of families have lost their livelihood that are fishermen because of the BP oil spill. We also have a lot of issues related to, the climate has created more intensified hurricanes. So we share those issues as well. I think that what we have to do in terms of connecting with the global efforts, I had the opportunity to go to COP21. I'm also on the board of Climate Reality. And what we're doing is bringing climate training through the Center for Earth Ethics to communities, environmental justice communities that otherwise would not have access to this information.
And Dune, the global connection.
Nobody on the planet is immune from plastic pollution or the impacts. So we, with our campaign, Stop Sucking, we decided to take it to a city and see if we could take over an entire city and get them to go single-use plastic straw-free. We did that in Seattle. And what's happened as a result of that is we have interest from all over the world to take that citywide takeover model and apply it to their cities. 40 cities globally right now is what the request is. And so what we're seeing is there is so much, I think, what's the right word I want to use? I guess disgust, quite honestly, with the amount of single-use plastics we have in our environment, that people are seeing the opportunity to take that success and bring it to their communities and make a difference.
Just as a point of reference, what's the estimate for how many straws are used per day in the U.S. and around the world? 500
million in the United States alone. The estimate that I've seen that's not verified yet is 1 billion per day annually. And we know that there are a few brands that have their fair share in the stake of how many straws are put out there. At the end of the day, it's really about our relationship to being a to-go culture and society. We love taking our coffees to go, right? We love taking our iced teas to go. And we're probably not going to change that. So what we need are real solutions around different kinds of materials we can put into the market.
Straws are very pervasive. You can go to a restaurant and order water, and they will bring it out with a straw in it.
Or your cocktail that has the 2-straw plastic garnish.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Right. I'd like to thank you very much for appearing on the panel today. That's all the time we have. Thank you again for joining us, and thank you to everyone for joining us here at the Washington Post and online. For highlights of more upcoming programs, visit WashingtonPostLive.com.
Thank you.